fellas, I went to my very first 1-year-old birthday party yesterday, and I have a 9-month-old daughter, and one of my friends has 2 kids technically, but the first one was during COVID, so we didn't do a birthday party for him, or for her, excuse me. But this time, we all got together, and there were like, I don't know, maybe 30 people and 8 kids, something like that, all crawling all over the place and like trying to eat light bulbs. And I was, oh my goodness, it was very cute, but also very, very stressful. Like each of the kids that were old enough to understand what presents were yelling about how they're their presents and they want to open them and stuff like that. And then one of the kids was like trying to eat wrapping paper, and my daughter Evie grabbed the birthday boy's hair and was like, "Oh, please don't pull the hair. Please don't pull the hair," and make him start crying.
I hope he did.
She pulled gently because she was interested, and he didn't start crying, thankfully.
She didn't immediately establish dominance?
No, thank goodness.
What a shame.
That's all I need. FD, you've got kids. You've experienced this, I'm sure, right? Does it ever get any easier, the kid birthday parties? Are you ever less stressed?
It depends on how serious of a parent you are. I see some parents go to birthday parties and they just like don't give a fuck. It's just like literally it's their party. There's you get into certain. I'm in Atlanta and I'm in the city, so I'm in kind of a latte liberal, progressive land, and like a lot of folks are solid, but a lot of folks are just kind of gross in a weird way that only liberals can be when they're around each other. Yeah. And so some of them, like so many parties I've been to, serve alcohol for the parents. And like literally I've just seen, parents act like it's their party and their kids are like just fighting to the death.
Accessories to him.
Yeah. And they're fighting to the death on the side, and like awful war crimes are happening. And they're just like, barely paying attention. So it depends on, so we always know which type of party we're going to. And we don't really parent like that. We're somewhere between gentle parenting and helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get easy unless you change the environment.
The parenting style. Yeah. The gentle parenting thing is like growing up, I grew up in a big family. I have 5 siblings, and I never really imagined having kids. It's not something like I really desired or thought actively about. But Kelsey always did want kids, so she's done all the research and stuff, and so she's clued me into all these things like what gentle parenting is, and solid starts is a thing where you use, or what is it called, baby-led weaning, where you let them basically kind of lead the way on what kind of foods they're capable of eating early on. Yeah. It's really interesting stuff, and it's oh my gosh, it's the most stressful thing. I've got a little, what's it called, like a Fitbit, and when I sit down to lunch with Evie, and she's got like, what did she try recently that was trouble? Watermelon, the real thin slices of watermelon, but which is, it's very easy to chew because it's soft. But the thing that I didn't realize, and Kelsey told me this afterwards, was that it's a difficult one for babies because they're not expecting the 2 different textures. It's very watery, so they get a lot of liquid in their mouth along with the soft solids, and so they'll gag a lot. And that every time that Evie starts making like a gagging face, I seize up and I grab the table, and my watch will like buzz at me like irregular heart rate. I'm like, come on, it's the scariest thing in the world. Oh my gosh.
There's a video in there somewhere about like the dystopia of raising children right now. So my kids are older, and we went through the baby phase in the, we had our first kid, and Obama was still president. And I was, and we weren't as, we weren't into gentle parenting yet. That didn't fully exist. We were trying to, we had a mix of old school parenting like we got, and then also like hopefully not so much of that. Like that was the best we had. But like the idea of a Fitbit that can tell me if my child might die, like that seems like a good idea, but it also seems really awful. You know what I'm saying? Like I just feel like that maybe isn't What?
It's not super for clarity. It's on my wrist, not hers. So it's telling like,
Right.
like that's all I need is a little device that's on hers. Like danger, baby is terminally
Right.
close to death. Like that's all I need.
Yeah.
But it's been very sweet. Like I've enjoyed the parenting stuff way more than I thought I would. And this birthday party yesterday was my I guess my first trial with multiple children in the Thunderdome at the same time versus just hanging out with mine. So it's very, very interesting. Yeah. But Hakeem, I guess you don't have any children of your own, but you've got a lot of family, right?
I have a lot of family. Thankfully, I don't have to look after them. The only kids I have to look after are very, very sick ones on my pediatric rotations. And those I'm more than glad to relay. They're fairly quiet. They tend to be at least.
Oh, poor
I know
kids.
it's fucked up,
Yeah.
but yeah. My younger relatives, a lot of them, I don't know why. I have like the two sides. One of them is like one side is super chill, calm. They'll sit there and be more or less relaxing. They'll talk a lot, but that's about it. And the other side, they're absolute demons. Okay?
Yeah.
They will raise the foundations of your home. Right? I mean, and like the yelling and the screaming and the fighting. And I'm like, just like sometimes I'm like, you shouldn't hit kids. But then I look at them like, maybe you should hit these kids.
There's always la chancla. You just use the
Exactly
sandal.
right. Exactly.
You
right.
understand where the philosophy was developed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is there's a ton. And that's something I had to like kind of unlearn. Like corporal punishment and stuff like that. Like I had to engage with that over time. But also, like I've also been to a lot of birthday parties and thought to myself, there's a disciplinary thing missing somewhere.
Yeah. All right, howdy y'all. Today we've got with us one of our most requested guests ever, the one and only FD Signifier. The man needs no introduction, but for any listeners who are still somehow unfamiliar with his work, FD makes video essays on social issues and the intersection of politics and culture. You may know FD Signifier from such bangers as The Real Faces of Black Conservatism and Dissecting the Manosphere, but every episode in his back catalog is well worth a watch. And I highly recommend everybody to check out his work. So, FD, thanks for coming on, and please tell the audience a little more about yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm FD Signifier. I am a relatively new creator. I feel like there was probably a wave of different creators across all of YouTube's many genres that kind of emerged during COVID. And I also feel like a lot of them have lost steam. Because, for a variety of reasons, but I'm one of the lucky few that has maintained steady growth during that time. And I'm a long-time consumer of, YouTube and video essays, especially at my age. I was probably one of the earliest adopters back in like the late 2000s, whenever YouTube first started. But not long after that, I was consuming YouTube probably more than I did TV, And it's funny now that I'm on YouTube and I'm older than I'm older than most of my peers, but when I'm around my friends, my day one friends who like they don't quite get that I do YouTube, like because they're not as avid consumers, they don't like see it as a replacement for regular, media consumption. And so, like, the fact that I quit a real job, to do YouTube for some people early on was like, can you do that? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
So
I know that feeling.
I started in COVID, partially out of boredom, partially because I think I did my first video maybe like the month after the uprisings after George Floyd, because I was on Facebook and I was seeing some very well-wishing but intensely uninformed takes around race by a lot of peers. A lot of my kids go to a well-mixed school, and so we have a handful of white friends, parents that we were connected to, and I was just seeing some of their responses to what was going on, and instinctually I was like, your kid plays with my kid, so I need to say some things. And so I wrote this like scathing takedown of white liberal race nonsense and was like, I can't put this out. And so then I made a video about Hamilton instead.
Yeah.
And I snuck enough of the stuff in. I was like, okay, this is good. And you know what? I like doing this. And then I kind of went from there. And over time, I've developed politically. I've recognized that success on YouTube just kind of ethically for me required me to be more political in my content. It did not feel good for me to make, medium spice stuff on teaching white people racism and get so much money for it. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna be Van Jones on CNN or I can't be that digestible. I have to be more spicy. And so I started becoming more political, which has led to just as much success, which is dope. It's also introduced me and reintroduced me to concepts further left than I was prepared to go when I started, that have even further developed me and kind of informed my work even more, and just good stuff all around. It's been a great experience, aside from the obvious, nonsense that you get into dealing with the online left and being I call it fake famous person. But I'm not, updating my resume anytime soon to get a real job.
Yeah.
So here I am.
Yeah, that's what you said about the having a moral obligation, kind of to make your channel something useful. That really resonates with me, because I started out in the same kind of vein as hey, here's an interesting fact, infographic kind of, which no shade to our friends that do stuff like that, but it just wasn't for me. It felt bad after a while, and come 2020 and the COVID stuff and all that, I had been reading some theory on the side, and I finally kind of snapped and said, all right, I'm gonna go off the deep end here. I'm gonna make one video about socialism explicitly, and if it torpedoes my channel, fine, I'll go back to Best Buy and work there. But luckily it worked out. Like you said, it's opened my channel up to an audience that is, if it's not as big, it's at least more loyal and more invested and more genuinely interested in the kind of the
content,
the politics, the culture, how all of these things intersect, and that's what makes it interesting, and it seems valuable to me. But anyway, I want to steer away from the politics for a minute to do something entirely for my own benefit, because I talk about this with my friend, or my friends ask me about this a lot. But anyway, here goes. This is probably my most reactionary take. I cannot stomach anime to the point to the point where I'm tempted to say, like, anime is bad outright, which I know is not fair at all. That's like dismissing all of Hollywood or all of American animation, stuff like that. But you put out a video pretty recently called "Why Do Guys Love Anime?" So I'm hoping you can help me and maybe help some listeners who are in the same boat. For pretty much all of my adult life, I've had this knee-jerk reaction of discomfort, or even sometimes revulsion when I'm presented with anime. And I think you understand where I'm going.
Yeah, I think that's a normal response to anime. Yeah, like I don't blame you.
At least some of it, because to me, when I hear the word anime, I think of like sexualized 5-year-olds. Oh, but it's okay because she's actually a 1,000-year-old dragon.
Yes.
Like explosive nosebleeds, which are clearly meant to suggest something else. The high-pitched yelling and the constant whimpering and stuff. And I have friends who say that stuff isn't present in all anime.
Right.
But I've yet to see one where that is the case. So am I just way off base here, or is there something to my negative reaction to this stuff?
You are not completely off base, but also, but yeah, you have, of course. So it's so interesting, since I've done that, I've actually come across like the anime, I don't even know what to call them. Like, they're the anime equivalent to like anarcho-syndicalists. Like, how me, I'm just like, socialism. Like, if we could redistribute wealth and maybe like, create some disruption in our political systems to access more useful support systems for those in need. And then you have like the anarcho-syndicalists, like, no, we're going to destroy all private property. Yada. And I'm not like against that, by the way. I'm just pointing out that there's like,
right, they're straight to bombing trains.
Right. There's a level that I didn't know existed in anime fandom that I just found out about, because I had responses that were like, this is cute and all, but what about like the academic, what about this book on otaku philosophy?
Oh, wow.
And it's like actually good shit. And this dude like explained to me how I was just on a live. I wish I remembered their names. I'll look into it so you can name drop them here. But I snuck into somebody's live because I tend to always, whenever I drop something new, I want to see critiques, because it helps me sharpen, good critiques, not like, pointing to the screen like, this guy is such an asshole, but like, useful critiques. And they're talking about how like a particular wave in anime they call isekai, which is all about this fantasy escapism. I'm sure you may know something about it. And it has a tendency to get really gross, but the underlying, kind of like stuff under it is actually really interesting, because I would imagine that the isekai is consumed by like teenage boys, but it's actually consumed by young adult and like aging men who are in that salaryman worker culture of Japan, where they've been completely alienated from, themselves, and they're like in this dystopian hellscape of, that Japan, I'm not going to say it is, I don't know enough about Japanese culture, but we know that Japan has a unique work culture in that like they have a word for dying from overwork. You know what I'm saying? And and these stories are usually about those guys get hit by a truck and then they're free in a fantasy world. And when you kind of like look at it from that standpoint, you're like, oh, well, there's actually at least some interesting social, cultural, political tidbits to chew on there. And that's my response to, and don't get me wrong, your response is why I don't watch anime as much as I used to. I got a little older, and jiggling boobs didn't have the same effect on me. And then like the age depiction of those boobs, I started getting further and further from. So I was like, this even feels weirder now. So that's there, but there's also such interesting stories being told. And before I'm anything, I'm probably a media junkie. I'm a lover of stories and storytelling. And so there are, I could shoot you a couple of things that you would find, anime has its own Discovery Channel. I'm not Discovery Channel. What did Breaking Bad come on?
HBO?
I don't know. Whatever. It has its own shows that are the equivalent of like prestige dramas, along with the 1,000-year-old dragon baby nonsense. But the real answer though, to me, and the reason why I made that video was just kind of like my experiences teaching boys. A lot of my stuff centers around masculinity. And I remember very vividly the type of joy I witnessed when like young men would get around each other around anime, and like the camaraderie and friendship they had. Sometimes it was around, the dragon lolly or whatever. So that's there's a intervention to be made there. But there was something to that. And one of the things that I think capitalism is doing, there's all this talk about the loneliness epidemic and all these things that are happening with men. What's wrong with men? And of course you have your reactionaries that say, well, what's wrong is women don't know their place, and Muslims and black people, etc. And really the answer is late capitalism. And so I operate a lot in like a love ethos. I'm a big Bell Hooks fan, despite some of her flaws. I'm big on empathy. And so recognizing that there doesn't have to be that there's a there with anime and young men, where you can capture that joy that they're experiencing in that medium and in those cultures, and you can cultivate it and make it resistant to alienation and the ugliness that late capitalism is pushing a lot of us through. And so I kind of wanted that video to be almost like a inspirational type of thing to that population, because they don't get spoken to like that very often. They're often spoken to as a problem population. Boys and men of all races, especially black men, but of all races, are often looked at as a problem population. And nobody wants to like hang out with them and give them hugs and attaboys enough. And I just kind of wanted that video to be in that realm.
Yeah, I think that's an admirable approach, because it is true that like, I mean, I got how many brothers do I have? I got two brothers, three sisters. Okay. I got two brothers, and they're one of them kind of got caught up in the whole manosphere adjacent stuff where he's like, oh, I have to be so careful about, men have to be so careful about what they say on dates and stuff. Like, man, you just got to be
normal.
Just don't be creepy. Just how hard is it to be a decent person? It is. I think it is so important to have, if not role models, at least people would be like, hey, it's cool. I mean, I'm a guy too. Like, we can talk about this stuff, and it's not like you're not on trial.
Yeah.
Things like that. But so I've watched, to get back to the anime, I when I was growing up, I watched on Toonami, Rurouni Kenshin and Yu Yu Hakusho, and I liked both of those. And then when I was a little bit older, I really liked Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I watched, what was that one called that inspired Avatar?
That inspired
Avatar? Is it Fooly Cooley? FLCL, something like that.
I don't know if that inspired Avatar or not, but it's like a seminal anime. It's like one of those.
It was
tier.
weird.
Yeah, it was very weird.
It was weird. Yeah, but it was interesting to watch. I don't think I remember it like any revulsion watching that.
There's some voyeuristic stuff with the girls there, but it's kind of like your mileage may vary. With there, it's meant to kind of typify the fact that we're in the head of a pubescent boy.
Yeah.
And so this is how a pubescent boy will look at women and girls, even in not like a lascivious nature. It's just kind of like, oh shit, I just realized titties. And so like, and as much as it's necessary to problematize that in our media, we also don't want to. There's a thing. I'm gonna start dropping like jargon, like carceral feminism and hegemonic masculinity and stuff like that. But there's just a thing that we do that's a very lazy form of activism and analysis on the left, where we kind of like just do what's really shallow, unfinished critiques of masculinity under patriarchy, and we kind of just like run with that. And so like, 13-year-old boy stares at a boob, so throw him in jail because we protect women. It's like, all right, can we cook that analysis a little longer? Can we protect women and address patriarchy and misogyny without alienating boys from relatively normal sexual development under capitalism, especially? And it's not on some, we're pushing guys to the right. Like, I don't believe that shit either. But I do believe that that we could be doing better in terms of like just developing our analytical tools for how we engage with boyhood and that development. I came out of grad school. I quit my PhD program once YouTube started taking off, and I sometimes shit on grad school more than I should just because it's funny. But I had a decent experience in grad school. But one thing that I am definitely like bitter about is recognizing that there were just very few men in gender studies. Like whether there be people in my program, my professors, or just like people who are doing the work, the only guy. And this is kind of like the problem. The biggest name in gender studies for the last like 15, 20 years got Me Too'd while I was in grad school. And it kind of like turned the whole discipline on its head because everybody was like, hey, he does men. So like he has his own journal. And it's like, okay, maybe everybody should be doing this at a higher level with more effort to like, I don't know how the hell we got there. See, I'm doing it. I'm doing it already.
Well, how about this? How about if you were to give me or someone like me one recommendation to cure me of my reactionary stance on anime, what do you think would be a good foot in the door?
So my favorite of all time is Madoka Magica. Now, it may not be the good first step because Madoka Magica plays upon you needing some familiarity with anime and anime tropes, which I think everybody has. Like everybody knows who Sailor Moon is.
Yeah, just culturally,
but it's just so good. It's so good visually. There's some really interesting social political commentary involved there. It's only 13 episodes. There's a bunch of movies that came after it, but don't watch those. Those all suck and they don't count. It's 13 episodes, and it starts a little slow, but once like you're hit with the reality of what the show is doing, you're gonna be like, holy shit, this is kind of amazing. If you want something a little more normie suitable, because Madoka Magica has like a talking cat and, you know, a giant clown monster and time travel. So you want something a little more normal. You can't go wrong with Death Note. It's just kind of a, you know, there's a reason why it has a Netflix adaptation that is awful. Death Note or Cowboy Bebop will kind of give you like strong understandings of what anime is capable of. So those are my three.
Yeah, I know. I meant to start watching Cowboy Bebop. Maybe I'll go back and give that a try, because that does, like, the art at least looks really cool for that, and I like the vibe. Yeah. But okay, all right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take the plunge. I'm gonna give it a try.
Weeb arc activated for JT.
Here we go. Oh no. Okay.
Second thought video in September. So why is anime socialist?
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of stuff in there too, by the way. Like there's some there as well.
Dude, Code Geass you can write extensively, but I was just being quiet this entire time because I was just letting you cook essentially, working on our boy JT. Because I've told him I've made some recommendations. I'm like, you can give it a go, my guy. And this dude doesn't take the bait.
I'm stubborn.
But hopefully,
I'm stubborn. What can I say?
It's all right. We'll turn you into a weeb yet.
One of these days, yeah, I'll show up at one of those cons dressed up as something or other. All right. now that I've been, I'm sure, thoroughly canceled for my media consumption, let's move on to something that matters a bit more. I think all of us here have made videos at least tangentially related to the whitewashing of radical figures in history. To use an example from one of your recent videos, FD, you talked about the conservative twisting of MLK's legacy. How much would you say the watering down of radicalism, and specifically black radicalism in the case of MLK, Malcolm X, or the Black Panthers, how much has that affected our modern understanding of what resistance to capitalism, racism, and other forms of oppression should look like?
It's fucking huge. Mm-hmm. It's why I'm so like grateful that video got the legs it got.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't expect million view videos very often. You know, you stumble upon them. I think I have 3 now. And that one was like, that's outdoing my Bo Burnham video, which was like my, you know, enunciation to white liberals that I was one of the good ones. So it's like now to come back and be like, all right, but fuck liberalism. And so for that one to outdo it, I'm like, yes, we're here. We're in there. So it's a huge thing because that video came from my political development the last, like, basically going into COVID. So I came out of Obama, probably a burgeoning leftist, like I think a lot of older millennials. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of older millennials, we voted for Obama as young adults, thinking that we were finally about to change the world. And we come out of Obama as, you know, in our 30s and early 30s, kind of like, oh, it's way deeper than that, we realize. Yeah. And we really got suckered in by this image of the perfect black capitalist mainstream neoliberal figure. You know, Obama, for all the critiques that he deserves, one thing you have to give him is that he's the most talented politician probably of our lifetime, right? And so you come out of that, a lot of millennials were kind of like trying to figure out, okay, so what else is there? You know, what else could we be doing? And in that moment, the left was invisible, especially for black millennials. It was completely, if you weren't in, you know, a sociology or political science program, you know, which are, you know, obviously most people aren't in, let alone African Americans, then that was invisible to you. And so you kind of just, you know, wandered around, just said, I guess I'll, you know, get behind Joe Biden and, you know, we'll see what happens next. So who ran against Clinton? I mean, Clinton, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, you know, because like we don't have any other choices, et cetera, et cetera. And so like that was me. Those last 2 videos were literally for me between 2016 and 2020. You know what I'm saying? The videos I wish I'd have seen as Obama was leaving office. And so for me in particular, I had a relatively radical upbringing. My mom was not a Black Panther, but she was affiliated with a lot of those communities, with not the Nation of Islam, but with Black Muslim communities in Chicago, right? So like a lot of like radical Black figures were in my general like pure view growing up, and I learned about what I realize now is cultural Pan-Africanism. Not Pan-African socialism, right? Scientific socialism. I learned about cultural Pan-Africanism. I learned only about Marcus Garvey, none about Kwame Ture. You know what I'm saying? I learned about W.B. Du Bois, but only the Talented Tenth, none of the socialism. And so what I realized through these years in research and engaging with further radical figures within these Black spaces and communities is that there's been an incredibly effective and intentional campaign to hide that history and that reality from Black people of all classes and social and economic backgrounds, because what you realize historically is that it's been Black people who have been the biggest threat to capital in America, pretty much from jump. And this is, this is known to everybody but us. And in place of that, we've gotten this Black excellence resistance, this Black resistance through commerce and economics. We have Killer Mike and Jay-Z saying capitalist is the N-word. And, we call it Get You a LLC Twitter. So many of these figures. And why it's effective is because it appeals to the insecurity of material resources that most Black people feel. Even Black people with access to resources, you realize they could go away pretty quickly. So many things could take them away from you and you won't have a chance to get them back. Then we have the promotion of these aspirational figures by the media in our public consciousness to say, hey, these are the leaders. These are who you should aspire to be, young Black man. I read Ben Carson's book as a kid. It was so like shocking and disappointing when I was like, motherfuckers been Republican the whole time? The fuck? So it's been such an effective propaganda, but now they're starting to get cracks in the armor. We know that millennials politically are much further left as we age than Gen X was, than anybody. Like, you're familiar with this? The trend is generally as people get older, they get more conservative, and millennials are not doing that. We're getting more leftists, in fact, because we've been, the system is broken, and we're here holding the pieces. And then, as that's happening, like right now, literally, Killer Mike is being drugged in Atlanta as we speak because the Greenwood Bank, which is his fake banking institution that is really a white-owned bank that he and some of his peers sold as a Black banking institution, bought a Black business club called the Gathering Spot. And this is a business club in multiple cities. It's like in Atlanta, DC, maybe like Chicago, I'm not sure. And it's a place where, Black excellence happen and all these Black people doing business and startups and tech. And we're all going to come here and we have our business club and we do cool things because we're cool. And they sold that motherfucker to the Greenwood, which is a white-owned bank. And this weekend, they fired the Black CEO of the Atlanta branch and replaced him with a white dude. And then said and then released a statement saying we are dedicated to diversity. And Black folks in Atlanta is like, diversity? No, motherfucker, this is Black. What is this diversity you're talking about? We didn't sign up for a diverse workspace. We signed up for a Black oriented workspace. And so he's getting drugged because this was his baby that he sold us. And what happens from there? Maybe there's a lot more, I think everybody's people are going to go along and get along with this election cycle. Right. Yeah. But maybe this is where it starts, where people start getting more actively involved in organizing or local politics. They just elected an outright socialist in Chicago, which is their first Black mayor in 30 years. So that's a thing. First Black male mayor, technically.
Yeah.
In 30 years. And he's, already seeing challenges, but it just speaks to a window of opportunity that's happening because so many black people are re-engaging with this political history that we've been disabused of for the last 60, 70 years.
Yeah, there's definitely some optimism to be had there, and I think one of the more effective ways I've found of reminding people about the radicalism of these past movements is to show that one political comic of MLK, and he's talking to a reporter, and like there's a flipped police car and there's something on fire in the background, and MLK says, "I plan to have another nonviolent march next week."
Right.
And it's like, okay, you see how they saw him in his time, before he was turned into a martyr and then into some fictitious form of himself.
Civil rights Santa Claus.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like the history that you are presented about, MLK, he came, he said some inspirational words, he shook hands with white people, and then racism was over.
Right.
That's not reality. That's not how this works. And it's good that people are kind of learning that and grappling with it and realizing that the real history, the real way of winning change is still the only effective way to do it.
Right. And it's insidious. Like the reason why I don't want to start drama here. I only Hakeem, I was thinking to myself, why do I know Hakeem so well? And I was like, oh wait, we share the same anti-fans.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't want to start too much drama. But without bringing up names, one of the reasons why I returned to that topic very recently, I just released a video on my side channel about lying about civil rights, is because they use that to then stamp down on other social action movements, other, because it was like, Martin Luther King wouldn't have did X, Y, and Z, and the transes shouldn't either. And it's like, motherfucker, Martin Luther King carried guns. Yeah. He just didn't talk about it. Like he understood what was really happening. He was strategic.
Yeah, we know exactly who you're talking about. Don't you worry. But you mentioned a little while ago that your mother was affiliated with the Black Panthers. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in that sphere, if you were close to it? I'm sure I'm not alone in being blown away with how well the organization was able to defend the black community, to take care of poor kids, to make sure they were fed, and to agitate for class consciousness, to endure, under intense pressure from the police. Were you aware of any of this struggle as a kid?
My mom was only a teenager when they were at their most active. Mm-hmm. And by the time she was old enough to be fully engaged, they had been mostly decimated, and there were multiple factions developing. I probably was closer to being connected to movements of, I'm about to fuck up his name. Is it Ron Karenga? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Ron Karenga. So I don't have a ton to tell you about the Black Panthers in their heyday and things I gleaned from my mother. But I can kind of give you the aftermath of what happens once a movement like that is targeted and decimated on numerous fronts. And also keeping it 100, the fractures that did happen within it. They were so thoroughly infiltrated by FBI informants and the police and the CIA, etc., because the Panthers were really operating on a socialist power to the people ethos, and they didn't want to turn away people, and so that made it possible for the government to compromise folks who were in dire straits when they were collected. That classic footage of Fred Hampton talking about education. That was not on accident. That was because they recognized, as they brought people in, if they were going to have a real people's movement that could survive the type of scrutiny and fire that they were under, they would have to make sure people understood why they were there and what the value was. And sadly, it didn't happen. So you have so many fractures that never really hit the lore of the Panthers, right? And the things that are allowed to survive are those that are more amenable to capital. Ron Karenga, who's the guy that my mother was connected to, one of the famous stories about him is that he was a part of a shootout. So Bunchy Carter was a Black Panther that was active in California and he had a like as the Panthers were being targeted, and as all these organizations were being targeted, right, and decimated, and the CIA was playing them against each other. Karenga was kind of just developing his group, and there was I don't know all the details, so we're gonna have to like do a deep dive on this lore. But the end result was a shooting between these two rival factions of black power organizing in California, and it just so happened that the faction that was less radical and more amenable to capital is the one that survived. And you see that kind of repeating throughout history with a lot of these movements, a lot of these that radical era. The more radical people were killed, put in jail, or left the country for fear of being killed or put in jail. And then who's left to tell the story?
Right.
And those are the stories I was told as when I was younger. Like that was the development of Black power and Pan-Africanism that I was taught under. It had nothing to do with socialism. It was all about just building up the image of Black people and the Black men, which then lends itself to, essentially Western chauvinism.
Yeah.
And so you see that legacy be picked up and even further perverted by the likes of Tariq Nasheed, you know what I'm saying? And insert who was a big person, even though they were never really that big a deal, but they definitely made their rounds on Left Tube. I can't remember the group that everybody made a video about.
Oh God. Was it Black Hammer?
Black Hammer, thank you.
Yeah.
So like that's not an accurate number one, that's not a that's not a very significant like image of any type of Black political movement, but it's also not even an accurate depiction of like cultural Pan-Africanism. That was like kind of like playing telephone, if you imagine. Like you have Pan-Africanism developing between all these colonized African nations and a handful of American participants, all throughout the early 1900s. And it immediately starts to lend itself to socialism and collectivist organizing, et cetera, et cetera. And you have all these groups winning their battles against colonial power, and then slowly being decimated and killed by Western powers. Then the people that are supposed to kind of hold the legacy and teach it to the next generation aren't there to do it, and so you only have certain aspects that get picked back up. And so after you play telephone long enough, you end up with Tariq Nasheed. And so I'm like at the second to last spot on the telephone in terms of that history. And it took me the last couple of years to look back across that history to connect with people who were actually there, or connect with people who hold the original text to that time, to be like, oh, so we were being taught wrong this entire time. A whole generation of young Black people are only being taught certain parts of the legacies of these figures. And that's, going back to that previous question, that's just kind of the design of the plot.
And I guess you could say the same thing kind of happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, where it had real potential to be guided by the principles of socialism, or at least, more left-wing principles, but was easily co-opted and kind of defanged by the less radical elements within it. Right. We don't know the extent to which it was infiltrated and stuff, but it's safe to assume that it was to a significant degree. And you saw the more radical figures in the movement being either arrested or harassed, and
some of them disappeared.
Exactly, yeah.
And then those who didn't left relatively early. And we won't know. We probably won't know that full story for a while, because we're not. And the other struggle here, getting into maybe me and Hakeem's mutual antagonizers in this space, is that a lot of times the people that we would rely on to like engage in these stories cannot be trusted to tell them without avarice. There's such a desire to pillory. There's a desire. I'm actually, starting to like in my head develop some work around like whiteness and this myth of anti-white racism. There's this like desire that exists still very much in progressive and liberal and even further left white spaces to kind of like defang the reality of racism as a white thing, and to find the examples and hyper focus on the examples of when black people or when colonized and oppressed people act in just like the oppressor. And, you know, and it's very much a cope, you know?
Yeah.
And what happens, what that does is it makes it so you have to be prudent when it's time to tease out problems that do exist, you know? I have to think, okay, I did this whole section on Marcus Garvey. I had the section on Marcus Garvey in the last conservative video. I had to like pare down because I was like, you know what? I'm just not comfortable talking this bad about Marcus Garvey in public. Because people are going to use that as a way to start using the term Blitler again, unironically. And so I need to like, you know, pull this back a little bit, you know. Same thing with Black Lives Matter. I think there are a lot of whistleblowers and people that know how deep the well went with that, but they're just not going to talk about it externally yet because of the dangers of amplifying, you know, Candace Owens again.
You mentioned Candace Owens right now, and I would like to segue into a question of mine. This is me being selfish myself, because you have a fantastic video about this, but I would really like to hear your kind of unfiltered delivery too about it. I'm sure you had to deal with this yourself quite a bit, but me being not African American and not American at all, I still happen to get recommendations of I guess I consume enough like adjacent content that it thinks that, hey, you know what, you want to see what Thomas Sowell has to say, like, oh, you want to see him dunk on commies or something, right? Like that ridiculous.
Yeah, it's so weird. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. But yeah, the related thing is like, yeah, Candace Owens and all these other like, I don't want to say black agents of capital, if I can even say that in that way, but it's these people that are intended to give legitimacy to pro-establishment perspectives from this downtrodden minority model, right? Could you please tell us, from your perspective at least, where do you think this comes from? What is the material reason for this black, quote-unquote, black conservatism, if we could even term it that?
So I wouldn't call, if you watch the follow-up video, I wouldn't even call Thomas Sowell and Candace Owens black conservatives. They're just, I think you used maybe a good term there, just black agents of capital, just black agents of, you know, neo-fascists, neoliberal fascists, you know, corporate tools. They're not really, their blackness is incidental to their content and their messaging. And overall, the key thing is that they are completely unconnected to actual black political thought. You will not hear, I did not know who Thomas Sowell was until I started doing YouTube and had right-wingers and debate stream fans say, hey, you should talk about Thomas Sowell. I'm like, who the fuck is Thomas Sowell? You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't know who he was. And like, he is not at all, you know, the black, Killer Mike is I'm more worried about Killer Mike. Killer Mike is a black conservative. He's very dangerous. He's becoming increasingly dangerous because he has so much aesthetic value within black communities and so much street cred, like literal and figuratively speaking. But I'll pause on him for a second. So coming back to like, another thing you pointed out is how they proliferate. And that to me is algorithmic. That is, I don't have a great explanation there. I feel like I have as good a take on how the algorithm works as anybody that's not a YouTube, you know, executive program or whatever. Like, I feel like I know, like, my success to be able to do a video where I talk about some of the stuff I talk about and have it be successful and get hundreds of thousands of views is because I feel like I've cracked, you know, the air quotes, crack the algorithm. But I still don't understand why the algorithm keeps sending me Thomas Sowell videos. Because I don't get pushed PragerU videos. I don't get pushed insert. I don't know who's the Ben Shapiro's company. What is this? Yeah.
Daily Wire.
Yeah, Rebel Media or Daily Wire.
Turning Point USA. I don't know, whatever Ben Shapiro's thing is. I don't get pushed that, but I will get pushed Thomas Sowell videos and a handful of Candace Owens videos, I guess, which I guess is Ben Shapiro's thing. And I get pushed like reactions to Thomas Sowell videos. So I don't know what that is. I can't call it because the algorithm tends to work on getting you to watch more YouTube. But I also know that these algorithms work as tools to convert audiences into more useful and lucrative consumer populations. I don't know if you've ever seen, it's a documentary on Netflix. I think it's The Social Dilemma. I think this is where I got that from, but I may have gotten it from somewhere else. But it's not just that the algorithm like says, hey, this video's viral, let's send it everywhere. It also says, this video's viral, how can we use it to funnel viewers into a genre of content that tends to produce more viewing? So one of the reasons why I know I am successful, and second though, why you're successful, and I'm sorry, JT, why you're successful, Hakeem, a lot of us, is that leftist, content, people consume it a lot. And so to get attached to this consumer base in this pocket of YouTube means to have more success, because YouTube wants to convert, normal people that are moderate to, just liberal, and say, hey, maybe you'd like this second thought video that's 20 minutes long. Oh, did you like that? You should really check out this Khadijah and Bo video that's 50 minutes long. Oh, did you like that? Here's a 2-hour long FD Signifier video.
Yeah.
And in between this, they're showing the ads, etc. So there's a cynical marketing element to it that I don't understand, because it doesn't work for me for Thomas Sowell. But I definitely feel like there's an oversaturation of Black conservative content on YouTube in the political sphere compared to, I'm tripping, it's because of white people. I'm getting it all backwards. In fact, you can cut half of that and just say it's because white people watch that shit. There's a strong desire for white audiences to consume, as you said, Hakeem, the Black face of colonial legitimization, of capital legitimization. At least that explains why the algorithm drives it. Because the algorithm technically doesn't know our race, but it knows the movement of, consumers, and white people make up the audiences of those folks, like almost completely.
I can lead into the final question now, which is possibly an irritating question to have at the very end because it's fairly complex. But I want to ask you, where do you personally see the place of race, specifically your experience as an African American man? And it kind of sucks that I'm kind of bringing, like, you're an African American guest, so I'm asking race related questions, but that's just out of genuine interest as somebody who isn't American, who tries to sympathize with the Black experience despite not experiencing it myself. Right. Although in a weird way, the internal periphery of the African American experience is paralleled by what those victimized by American imperialism can kind of feel. Like there's a weird solidarity, and not solidarity, like a fraternity of sorts. That
makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that
exactly
was
right. But
that was a big part of the of Pan-African and the Black Power movement. I mentioned Kwame Ture. One of his. So Kwame Ture is not perfect, right? None of these figures are perfect, and I hate how a lot of times we tend to deify these figures to be infallible and without bad moments. And so one of the problems he ran into was kind of like engaging with Zionism. And, that always has the way that works out is you end up having to be talked about in the same conversation as, anti-Semites. Right. And then you start talking about, well, what counts as, the Israeli people, and there's a bunch of stuff that I don't want to get into and put on a podcast. But he was still very solid in the fact that his issue wasn't with Judaism, it was with colonialism. And so that's why he was anti-Vietnam. Martin Luther King was anti-Vietnam. And you saw the development of that ethos during that time. But now I don't have the strongest take here in terms of like a leftist engagement around race. Only in that we have to start problematizing it. There's an internal discourse with Black folks that we're starting to have around the intersection of race and class, because I think we're starting to recognize how class has been used to divide black people within race, if that makes sense. You know, going back to the Killer Mike and, you know, the Jay-Z's, how they can position themselves as black leaders and like agents of black liberation while clearly working in the you know, working for capital and working against black liberation in that regard. And that comes from, you know, a hatred of the poor. It comes from internalized anti-blackness. It comes from all these different aspects that cannot be, that has to be an in-house, you know, address, like plan to address it. It will not and cannot be fixed through an external cross-collaborative process. At the same time, once we do start having external cross-collaborative actions with, you know, different political factions of the left and different, you know, power brokers in the left and whatever else, there are so many problems in how the absence of basic race theory, just like basic shit you should get from any like card carrying, you know, I'll call yourself a leftist person, should be able to understand why an individual who we won't name shouldn't be saying certain things that they've recently said about race on various platforms. You know, it's things that you could get from watching fucking Get Out and Jordan Peele, right? Like people that like every leftist should be able to tell me what that movie was really about. And it wasn't about like just scary bad white people. It was about liberal racism. And the fact that we don't have that baseline understanding around race means that we have a lot of work to do, right? Like that's a given. But it also means that black people will continue to kind of organize and build independently and sparingly with other comrades outside of blackness, because it's so much work to we just haven't gotten to that point yet. There's so much work in educating around the way race works with capital, you know, white supremacy as a function of capitalism, as a function of fascism, like understanding how that really works. And whiteness is a fucking powerful drug. It truly is. And its biggest tool, the thing it does, its most valuable asset is that whiteness and white supremacy renders itself invisible. It only pops out when a police officer puts their knee on a black man's neck for 10 minutes, or, you know, or something else bombastic. Like only then does white supremacy exist in the cultural consciousness of the West. Beyond that, it's like, yeah, everything's cool, right? You know, handshakes, cornrows, black TikTok dances, all the stuff. You know, I love Eminem and Macklemore. They're my favorite rappers. Like stuff like that is the baseline for race consciousness in this country among white people, and to disabuse them of that takes a lot of effort and work that the average black person, myself included, can only do sparingly, if at all. And the average white person can't do effectively independent of that, independent of a black, of somebody who's an expert guiding them, you know. And there are like white experts on race. There have to be, because we can't get into fucking, you know, higher academia to lead the discourse. But like they, you know, they're also marginalized because of what they talk about. So it's a tough situation that, you know, again, I think is progressing. I don't think it's an accident that my emergence, at least in the online left, has been met with so much overt resistance from so-called leftists who are trying their best to, you know, paint me as an anti-white racist. You know, like that is such a useful dog whistle. You know what I'm saying? And it's useful to me because it's like, oh, I know exactly what you guys are doing. You know, like you're not critiquing my work and my takes. Like I don't know shit about, you know, there's so many things you could critique me on, but you're going for the thing that you know does the thing that you need it to do, which is invalidate what I'm saying. And so I think that resistance is emblematic of growth. You know, Andrewism, who y'all should probably have on at some point in time, who does great videos, just hit 100,000 subscribers. Like, and he does no drama. He does no media analysis. He does no pop culture. It's just anarchism. It's just high-minded, you know, black anarchism videos. And 100,000 subscribers off that. That is amazing. And that speaks to a change in I want to say the economy, but at least a change in the wave of what we're doing.
I was just going to say, by the way, about your point on anti-white racism. Anybody who's labeled an anti-white racist is somebody who I'd want to listen to more, frankly.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
Excellent work. Yeah. That's what I want to see more of. I'm being ridiculous.
Unironically, though, that is a real thing I've seen on Twitter the last couple of weeks, you know. And there's like drama. Like, I don't want to make it seem like mistakes haven't been made in engaging with drama by me and some of my peers in terms of like being pulled into this nonsense. But it's still pretty clear where the core of a lot of it lies in terms of like why certain fandoms and populations of the online left feel such a compelling need to see outspoken black people who are anti-racist and overtly hostile to whiteness as somehow equally bad as Nazis and fascists, etc. Not understanding that whiteness isn't a real thing and not having any, like, everybody did a critical race theory video in 2021. And I just still can't believe this shit. That I saw 500 critical race videos done by white people in 2021 and none of them understand that white isn't a real thing. It's like, how did you do that? How did you do that? You know, what did you read?
The miracle of centrism. Yeah.
Yes. That's the name of the video. Thank you. I was trying to figure out what
you got it.
I'm working on a centrist video. It's going to have Killer Mike on the front.
Oh, yes.
And
I can't wait to see that one.
I'm going to I'm actually going to put the effort in to talk to some non-gross centrists.
Nice.
And I'm going to like try to like do a functional engagement with why that shit is stupid. You know what I'm saying?
Godspeed, man. You are a stronger man than I am.
We'll see.
That's exciting. Can't wait to see that. All right, well, let's call it there. I know your back is calling it quits at this moment.
Indeed.
As we hit the hour 15 mark or whatever it is. Anyway, FD, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast. I think it's been enlightening for both us and for our audience. And I know I speak for all three of us when I say that you are welcome on the show anytime. We would love to have you. So if you would, just one more time, let our listeners know where they can find you and your work. And if you're working on anything, give us a little hint.
Definitely. So this is FD Signifier. I am mostly on YouTube because I am weaning myself off of Twitter because I'm not good at it. I can't do it. I start yelling and seeing red and sticking my thumb through my phone screen. I am on Instagram. On Instagram, I share more like family and personal stuff, so it's not very political. My videos range in terms of like their politics. So understand the anime video is pretty much apolitical. You'll hear the dog whistles, right? But it's not like every video is not gonna dive into leftist territory, and that's for a purpose of reason because I kind of think I serve, especially as a black figure, is that my biggest use is a gateway drug to the left for black normies is my kind of like how I imagine myself. And my next video is actually just about how I made it on YouTube. It's one of those like, here's how YouTube works videos.
Nice.
And I'm kind of trying to like push that out pretty quickly with low effort because my video after that for the end of August is titled Fuck the Police.
Yes.
And it's going to be, God willing, it'll be a kind of high production project, at least for me. And I talked to some serious people about serious things, and I did some serious research. So look for that one late August, and look for the YouTube one early August. Oh, and check me out on Signified B-Sides when you'll get this version of me there, the aloof, rambling FD only exists on Signified B-Sides, where I go live and leave snippets of those lives.
All right. Well, you got lots to check out. We will leave links to all of these things in the description. Highly recommend everybody check out FD's work. It really is something special. I'd like to thank all of our patrons. You guys make this possible, keep us completely ad-free and independent. So if you want to hear some bonus episodes, join the Discord, consider supporting us on Patreon. With all that being said, this has been the Deprogram. I'm JT.
I'm Hakeem.
This is FD.
And anime may or may not be good. The jury's still out.